Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here at Activate Learn on Twitter. It is time for another book review, and this time round it is We Germans by Alexander Starritt. Now, as you can see, it is a library book. You might not know that a couple of weeks ago Melbourne had gone into lockdown 4.0, as we called it here. Everyone hated it. We're just slowly getting out of lockdown, although there are still lots of restrictions. But before the lockdown was announced, I dashed into the local library and I simply picked out two books from the new books bookshelf, and I went into the library and I just went bang bang, took two books, borrowed them and rushed out so I could get into lockdown. And one of these two books was Alexander Starritt's We Germans. I've not heard of this author before. This is his second book. He does have another book to do with journalism, and indeed when I looked him up, he is also a TEDx speaker talking about tabloid journalism. But in this book, the topic is, should a nation feel guilty over something that they had done many years ago? And it's a tough one. And I must admit, I actually tried to not do a review of this book straight away, because even though the book is highly readable, there's a lot of things in this book that were pretty hard going, pretty hard to stomach, just because of the brutality, the savagery, barbarity of what men do to other men at times of war. So if you think reading a book, a horror book like The Exorcist or some other horror book that might be a bit surreal is hard, if you read something that actual humans do to other humans, I think it's a lot worse, and this at times was it for me. But what is the book about? The book is about Meisner. Meisner was a 19-year-old German. He was a chemistry student. All he wanted to finish his studies and become an organic chemist. And yet the war didn't allow him. He was recruited into the Nazi army, into infantry, and he was sent to the Eastern Front. And he spent 4 years at the Eastern Front, and he saw his fellow soldiers die. And he wondered, why was he still around after 4 years? If he's still surviving after 4 years, maybe this is something telling him that he's going to survive for this entire stint. It does also talk about the disparities between a lot of the things that we saw on television with regards to Germans being on the Western side versus those who were sent to the East into Russia, and towards the end of the war where the Germans were actually losing the war and were afraid of the Russians coming in. And in fact, the Russians were on par, if not worse at times, with the Nazis. So it's giving us, I guess, the conditions about what Germans faced in Russia as they tried to scramble back to Berlin towards the end of the war, and the really desperate conditions, the hunger, the starvation, the depravity. Things just got really way out of control, if you could say that things were in control. And this is what the book is about. So this guy Meisner finally pens his letters, his reflections to his grandson Callum, who lives in Scotland, and who kind of questions what did his grandfather do during World War II, because he had never heard the stories from his grandfather. It was kind of like a whole history there that was just not talked about for many years. And so it was a way for Meisner to actually present his side of the story and talk about, I guess, not the guilt that he felt, because he felt that if he didn't know what the army, what the Nazis were doing, then was he part of that whole situation. But he actually did feel a lot of shame. So he felt shame for being part of it. He felt shame for his country being the perpetrator of these horrible acts, and this ever-pervasive shame that seems to sit on an entire country and the people afterwards. And like, we can't imagine it because we haven't been through those generations post-war, and in fact all the Western type of programs that we see on television give the perspective of the Allied perspective. And so we just simply don't understand about this horrible, evil situation where people participate in these and are part of this collective evil perpetration for an entire generation, which continues then through the generations that follow them. The shame, the questions, we just simply don't understand it. Even though, look, this is a fictional account, you can imagine that things like this would have happened. And the book, the way it is written, it's actually quite thoughtful. It's more reflections than anything else. There's no blame on either side, but it's just I guess a collection of reflections from Meisner to his grandson in the hope of trying to get his grandson to see that yes, there was shame in his participation of it. This book I really like this book, but there were just elements I just couldn't read because it was too confronting and too shocking to read about what they were doing to other humans. How in the end the Germans actually even turned onto each other as well. It was pretty shocking. That's my review. I think I'll leave it at that. I would recommend this book simply because it obviously gives another perspective to the German situation and also gives us a perspective about what happened at on the Russian front, which is something we probably don't hear of a lot. It talks about the morals of war. Are there morals in war? Anyway, it is a tough read, so let me warn you with that, but it is a good read and an important read at that. Anyway, so that is it. We Germans by Alexander Starritt. Thanks for listening and thanks for watching. Bye for now.